The sun was setting slowly over Chicago's skyscrapers, tinting the sky with shades of orange and purple. On the 14th floor of an old building in the city center, Detective Jack Brennan observed the urban landscape through the dusty window of his office. At 50 years old, Brennan carried the weight of decades of solved and unsolved cases on his broad and tired shoulders. His weary gaze swept across the dimly lit room, pausing for a moment on the wall covered with photos and newspaper clippings. In the center, a black and white photograph of a smiling young woman stood out. Sarah Thompson, 22 years old, missing for exactly 25 years on that date. Brennan sighed deeply, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that had accompanied him for a quarter of a century. To the world, Sarah was dead, her case filed away and forgotten. But for Jack Brennan, it was an open wound that refused to heal. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his hoarse voice echoing in the empty room. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman, gray hair framing a face marked by time and pain. "Detective Brennan," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if you remember me." "How could I forget, Mrs. Thompson?" Brennan responded, gesturing for her to enter. "Please, have a seat." Margaret Thompson, Sarah's mother, hesitantly entered the office. Her eyes immediately found her daughter's photo on the wall, and for a moment, Brennan saw a flash of unbearable pain cross her face. "It's been 25 years today," said Margaret, sitting in the chair in front of Brennan's desk. I shouldn't have come. I know the case was archived, but you still haven't given up," Brennan completed, sitting down as well. "Neither have I, Mrs. Thompson. Neither have I." A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Brennan observed the woman in front of him, remembering the desperate young mother he had met so many years ago. Time had not been kind to Margaret Thompson, just as it hadn't been to him. "Something happened," Margaret finally said, her voice almost a whisper. "Something that, well, it might mean nothing, but..." Brennan leaned forward, his attention fully focused on the woman in front of him. "What happened, Mrs. Thompson?" Margaret hesitated for a moment before opening her purse and taking out a yellowed envelope. With trembling hands, she extended it to Brennan. "This arrived yesterday by mail. No return address, nothing. I couldn't open it." The detective took the envelope, feeling the weight of expectation and fear in the air. Carefully, he opened it, removing a single sheet of paper from inside. His eyes quickly scanned the contents, and Brennan felt his heart race. "My God," he murmured, looking at Margaret with a mixture of shock and hope. "Mrs. Thompson, this could change everything." "What does it say?" Margaret asked, leaning forward, her eyes wide with anxiety. Brennan hesitated for a moment before reading aloud, "She's still alive. Look where the waters meet the sky. Time is running out." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret brought her hands to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. This means... "It means we have a new lead," Brennan said, standing up abruptly. "And that, after 25 years, we might finally have a chance to find out what really happened to Sarah." At that moment, as the sun finally disappeared over the horizon, plunging Chicago into darkness, Jack Brennan felt a spark of hope he hadn't experienced in decades. The dormant case had awakened, and with it, the promise of long-awaited answers. Little did he know that this new lead would take him on a journey that would test not only his skills as a detective, but also his own sanity and everything he believed in. Jack Brennan stood up, walking to the window. The night city glowed outside, thousands of lights twinkling like earthly stars. He turned to Margaret, who was still holding the envelope with trembling hands. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to tell me everything that happened in the last few days. Anything out of the ordinary, no matter how small it may seem." Margaret furrowed her brow, concentrating. I don't know. Everything seemed normal until yesterday. The envelope arrived in the afternoon mail. I thought it was some delayed correspondence, but when I saw it had no return address. Her voice faltered. Brennan nodded, understanding. "I see. And in the previous days? Any strange phone calls, anyone watching you, anything?" The woman began to shake her head but then stopped abruptly. "Wait. 3 days ago, I saw a car parked in front of my house. I thought it was strange because it stayed there for hours. When I finally went out to check, it drove away quickly." The detective picked up a notepad. "Do you remember the color, model, any details?" "It was dark, maybe navy blue or black. A sedan, not very new. I think I saw a sticker on the rear bumper, something related to fishing." Brennan jotted down the information, his mind already working on the possibilities. "Great, Mrs. Thompson. This could be important." He hesitated for a moment before asking the next question. "I know it might be painful, but I need you to tell me again about the day Sarah disappeared. Every detail could be crucial now." Margaret closed her eyes, as if reliving that fateful day. It was a Tuesday. Sarah had just started her internship at Goldstein and Associates law firm. She was so excited. A sad smile crossed her lips. That morning, she left early, as always. Said she was going to stop by the coffee shop before work. It was her daily ritual. Brennan listened attentively, noting details that might have gone unnoticed before. "And that was the last time you saw her?" Margaret nodded, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "Yes. When she didn't come back at night, I knew something was wrong. Sarah would never stay out without letting me know." The detective moved closer, placing a comforting hand on Margaret's shoulder. "I know it's difficult, but you're doing a great job. Every bit of information brings us closer to the truth." He returned to his desk, pulling out a thick, dusty folder from a drawer. Sarah's case file. He opened it, revealing photos, reports, and notes yellowed by time. "During all these years," he began, "I always felt we were missing something. Some crucial detail that would explain everything." His eyes scanned the familiar pages. "Was the law firm investigated?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, extensively. Everyone had solid alibis. The police concluded that Sarah never made it to the office that day." Brennan frowned. "And the coffee shop?" The barista remembered her. Said Sarah got her usual coffee around 8:15 a.m. After that? Margaret shrugged, helpless. The detective stood up abruptly, an idea forming in his mind. The message said where the waters meet the sky. Margaret, did Sarah ever mention liking any place near the water? A lake, the river, anything? Margaret's eyes widened. The pier. Sarah loved going to Navy Pier on weekends. She said it was where she could see the infinite horizon of Lake Michigan. Brennan felt a wave of adrenaline. That's it. It might be a coincidence, but... He grabbed his coat. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to investigate this immediately. Please, go home and stay alert." If you receive any more messages or notice anything strange, call me right away." Margaret stood up, a spark of hope in her tired eyes. "Detective Brennan, do you really think that after all this time?" He paused at the door, turning to face her. "I don't know what we'll find, Margaret. But I promise I won't give up until we uncover the truth. Sarah deserves that. You deserve that." As they left the office, the Chicago night enveloped them. The streets were busy, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Brennan accompanied Margaret to a taxi, watching it depart before heading to his own car. The journey to Navy Pier was a torrent of thoughts and theories. Why now, after 25 years? Who would send such a cryptic message? And, most importantly, could Sarah really be alive after all this time? Upon arriving at the pier, Brennan was greeted by the familiar sight of the illuminated Ferris wheel and the bustle of tourists enjoying the night. He walked slowly, his experienced eyes scanning every face, every shadow. That's when he noticed a man standing at the edge of the pier, staring fixedly at the lake. Even from a distance, there was something familiar about that silhouette. Brennan approached cautiously, his heart racing with each step. The man must have sensed his presence, for he turned slowly. In the dim light of the lampposts, Brennan saw an aged but unmistakable face. A face he knew well from the case files. "Robert Goldstein," Brennan said, his voice barely disguising his surprise. "Sarah's boss at the law firm." Goldstein smiled sadly. "Detective Brennan. I was wondering how long it would take you to get here." "You sent the message," Brennan stated. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Goldstein replied, his gaze returning to the lake. "It's time for the truth to come out. After all these years, it's time for Sarah to finally come home." Brennan felt a shiver run down his spine. "Where is she, Goldstein? What happened that day?" The lawyer sighed deeply. "It's a long and complicated story, Detective. A story that began long before that fateful day 25 years ago. But now, finally, I can tell you everything." As the waves of Lake Michigan gently lapped against the pier, Brennan prepared himself to hear the truth he had sought for so long. A truth that, he suspected, would forever change not only his life, but that of everyone involved in the mysterious disappearance of Sarah Thompson. Brennan stared intently at Robert Goldstein, struggling to contain the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Anger, confusion, hope, everything mixed in a whirlwind in his chest. "Speak," he said simply, his voice hoarse with tension. Goldstein took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep and turbulent waters. "It all started long before Sarah came into our lives. I was a young, ambitious lawyer, hungry for success. And it was that hunger that led me to make deals with, well, let's say they weren't the kind of people you'd want as enemies." Brennan frowned. "What kind of deals?" "Money laundering, mainly," Goldstein replied, shame evident in his voice. "I helped clean money for a criminal organization through shell companies. It was lucrative, and I told myself no one was really getting hurt." The detective felt his stomach churn. "And Sarah found out." Goldstein closed his eyes, as if the memory was too painful to bear. "She was brilliant, you know? Too perceptive for her own good. She noticed discrepancies in a client's accounting books. Started asking questions. "Tell me exactly what happened," Brennan demanded, his voice tense. Goldstein nodded, his gaze lost in the dark waters of the lake. "It was a Tuesday. Sarah had arrived early, as always. I saw her bent over a pile of documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she saw me, her eyes, there was something in them. Concern, confusion, maybe even a little fear. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. She asked to speak with me privately. Closed the door to my office and started talking about inconsistencies she had noticed, suspicious transfers, companies that seemed to exist only on paper. My heart raced. I knew she was dangerously close to the truth. "What did you do?" Brennan asked, his voice barely disguising the tension. I tried to throw her off. Said they were complex accounting procedures, perfectly legal. But Sarah, she wasn't convinced. She said she was going to investigate further, that something wasn't right. Brennan stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Goldstein. "And then?" I panicked, Goldstein admitted, shame evident in his voice. I knew that if Sarah kept digging, not only would I be in danger, but she would be too. The organization wouldn't hesitate to silence her permanently. "So you made her disappear," Brennan accused, his voice trembling with contained anger. "No!" Goldstein exclaimed, turning to face Brennan for the first time. "It wasn't like that. I tried to protect her. When I realized she was too close to the truth, I planned to get her out of the city. But the organization found out. They got to her before I could act." Brennan felt a wave of nausea. "What happened next?" Goldstein sighed heavily. "They kept her in captivity for days. I begged for her life, promised I would keep her quiet. Finally, they agreed to let her live, but with one condition: she would have to disappear. Completely." "And you agreed," Brennan said. "It wasn't a question." "What choice did I have?" Goldstein replied, his voice breaking. "It was that or her death. I arranged a new identity, a new place to live. Far from everything and everyone she knew." Brennan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Where is she, Goldstein? Where's Sarah?" The lawyer sighed deeply. "Alive. Hidden. Protected." He took an envelope from the inside pocket of his coat. "This is the address. A small town in Oregon. She's living under the name Emily Carter." Brennan took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why now? Why after 25 years?" "The organization finally fell," Goldstein explained. "The last of the leaders was arrested a month ago. It's safe now. Sarah, Emily can come home." The detective felt a wave of emotions hit him. Relief, anger, confusion all at once. "You stole 25 years from her. From her life, her family." Goldstein nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. But she's alive, detective. And now she can have her life back." Brennan looked at the envelope in his hands, hardly believing he finally had the answer he had sought for so long. "You're going to turn yourself in," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Goldstein replied. "It's all arranged. My lawyer is waiting for me at the police station. I'm going to confess everything." For a long moment, the two men stood in silence, the sound of waves filling the air between them. Finally, Brennan spoke. "How was she? All these years?" Goldstein closed his eyes, as if visualizing something painful. "Scared at first. Confused. Angry. But over time, she built a life. Became a teacher. helped children with learning difficulties. He opened his eyes, facing Brennan. She made the best of the situation, detective. She's stronger than any of us. Brennan nodded slowly, absorbing the information. I'm going to get Sarah. Emily. Whatever her name is now. And I'm going to bring her home. Goldstein agreed. It's the least she deserves. Tell her I'm sorry. For everything. As he watched Goldstein walk away towards his inevitable surrender, Brennan found himself torn between the euphoria of finally solving the case and anger at the injustice of it all. 25 years lost. Lives destroyed. And for what? With a heavy sigh, he picked up the phone. He had an important call to make. Hello, Mrs. Thompson? It's Detective Brennan. I found Sarah. She's alive. The sound of Margaret's crying on the other end of the line was a mixture of joy and pain accumulated over decades. Brennan felt his own tears begin to fall. I'm going to bring her home, he promised. I'm finally going to bring her home. In the weeks that followed, Jack Brennan's life became a whirlwind of activity. The trip to Oregon was an emotional roller coaster. He vividly remembered the moment he knocked on the door of Emily Carter's small house. The woman who answered was and wasn't Sarah Thompson. The same green eyes, but now framed by lines of expression that spoke of years of worry and loneliness. The same hesitant smile, but now carrying the weight of a life lived in the shadows. Sarah Thompson? Brennan asked softly. Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear and hope dancing in their depths. Nobody has called me that in a long time, she whispered. In the days that followed, Brennan explained everything to Sarah. The fall of the criminal organization, Goldstein's confession, the assurance that she could finally return home. Sarah oscillated between tears of joy and moments of absolute panic. I don't know if I can do this, she confessed one night, sitting on the porch of her house. Going back, facing everything and everyone. It's as if the Sarah they knew died a long time ago. Brennan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to be the same Sarah. No one expects that. But there are people who love you, who never stopped looking for you. Your mother. At the mention of Margaret, Sarah let out a sob. My mother, how is she? Will she recognize me? She never stopped loving you, Brennan replied softly. Never stopped looking for you. The return to Chicago was a surreal experience. Sarah, or Emily, as she sometimes still called herself, looked out the airplane window with a mixture of fascination and terror. The city that was once her home now seemed like a foreign country. The reunion with Margaret was heartbreaking. Mother and daughter embraced, crying and laughing at the same time, 2.5 decades of separation dissolving in a moment of pure love and relief. But coming home wasn't the happy ending everyone had hoped for. Sarah struggled to adapt. The world had changed dramatically in 25 years. Technology, culture, relationships, everything was different. I feel like a relic, she confessed to Brennan during one of their frequent meetings. As if I had been frozen in time and now I'm thawing in a world that doesn't recognize me. Brennan, in turn, faced his own challenges. The case that had defined his career was solved, but it left a strange void in his life. He found himself calling Sarah frequently, just to check how she was doing. The interviews with the police and the press were endless. The Sarah Thompson case had captured the public's imagination, and everyone wanted to know more. Sarah, however, refused to speak to the media. "I've already lost so much of my life," she told Brennan. "I don't want to lose what's left of it being a public spectacle." Goldstein kept his word and turned himself in. His trial was a media circus, with Sarah being called to testify. It was the first time she had seen her former boss since the day of her disappearance. "I'm sorry," Goldstein said when their eyes met in the courtroom. "For everything." Sarah just nodded, years of complex emotions passing through her eyes. Weeks turned into months. Sarah started therapy, struggling to reconcile her two lives, that of Sarah Thompson and Emily Carter. She tried to resume her career in law but discovered that her passion now lay in teaching. "I think Emily left her mark on me," she told Brennan with a sad smile. "I can't simply erase her." Brennan, for his part, began to think about retirement. The Sarah Thompson case had been the pinnacle of his career, and nothing else seemed to compare. On a sunny afternoon, weeks after her return to Chicago, Sarah knocked on the door of Brennan's office. "Come in," he called, a smile forming on his face as he saw her. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise." She entered, looking both familiar and strange. 25 years had left their marks, but there was a resilience in her eyes that Brennan couldn't help but admire. "I'm still getting used to being called Sarah again," she said with a shy smile. "I came to thank you for never giving up, for bringing me back." Brennan shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I just wish I had figured it out sooner." Sarah moved closer, gently placing her hand on his. "You didn't give up. That means more than you can imagine." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of 25 years of separation, search, and finally redemption hanging between them. "What are you going to do now?" Brennan asked softly. Sarah looked out the window, at the city that was once her home. "Start over. It's scary, but it's also exciting. I have a second chance at life. I'm not going to waste it." Brennan nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and a twinge of sadness. "You'll do well, Sarah. You've always been strong." She smiled, a gleam of determination in her eyes. "And this time, I'm going to live my life on my own terms. No secrets, no fear." "And what about you, Jack?" Sarah asked, turning to face him. "What does the future hold for the great Detective Brennan?" He laughed softly. "I don't know. I thought about retiring, but... Sarah encouraged. "But I think there's still work to be done," he admitted. "Other unsolved cases, other families waiting for answers." Sarah smiled, gently squeezing his hand. "The world needs people like you, Jack. People who don't give up." When Sarah left the office, Brennan felt as if a chapter in his life was closing, but another, equally exciting one was about to begin. The case that had consumed him for so long was solved, but it left behind a powerful lesson about persistence, hope, and the power of truth. He turned to the wall, where Sarah's photo was still hanging. Carefully, he removed it, replacing it with a new one, a recent photo of Sarah, smiling alongside her mother. A new beginning, he thought. In the months that followed, Sarah slowly rebuilt her life. She decided to combine her two identities, using her experiences as Sarah and as Emily to help others. She began working at a nonprofit organization, assisting people who were rebuilding their lives after long periods of absence, ex-inmates, people who had been in comas, kidnapping survivors, and others who, like her, had been forced to live in the shadows. Her work quickly gained recognition. Sarah became a powerful spokesperson for those struggling to reintegrate into society. Her lectures on resilience and new beginnings attracted crowds, and she soon found herself writing a book about her experiences. Two Lives, One Path became a bestseller, not only because of Sarah's incredible story but also because of the message of hope and perseverance she conveyed. In the book, she spoke openly about the challenges of readjustment, the nightmares that still haunted her, and the guilt she felt for having abandoned her family, even if involuntarily. Margaret, her mother, became her greatest ally on this journey. The two women rebuilt their relationship, cherishing every moment together as if it were precious, because, as they had learned the hard way, it really was. Jack Brennan, in turn, decided not to retire completely. Inspired by Sarah's work, he began offering consultancy to families of missing persons, using his vast experience to help those still seeking answers. He and Sarah remained in close contact, united by a bond forged through 25 years of search and hope. On an autumn afternoon, 5 years after Sarah's return, she and Brennan met for coffee. The detective, now with completely gray hair, smiled as he saw Sarah approach the table. "You look well," he commented, noticing the sparkle in her eyes and the confidence in her steps. Sarah smiled, sitting down. "I am well, Jack. Really well. And you?" Brennan nodded. "I can't complain. The consultancy work has been rewarding. Last week, we helped reunite a family after 12 years of separation." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, her face lighting up. Then, she became serious for a moment. "You know, I've been thinking a lot lately. About time, about second chances." "Really?" Brennan asked, leaning forward with interest. Sarah nodded. "Yes. I realized that, as painful as everything I went through was, it also gave me a unique perspective. Every day is a gift, Jack. Every moment is an opportunity to make a difference." Brennan smiled, feeling a wave of pride. "You certainly have been making a difference, Sarah. Your work has helped so many people. And I couldn't have done it without you," she said, placing her hand on his. "You never gave up on me, Jack. You never lost hope." For a moment, they were silent, letting the weight of those words hang between them. Then, Sarah smiled again. "I have some news," she said, a gleam of excitement in her eyes. "I've been invited to lead a national support program for missing persons and their families. It's a chance to take our work to a completely new level." Brennan felt his heart fill with joy. "Sarah, that's incredible. Congratulations." "Thank you," she replied, then hesitated for a moment. "Actually, there's one more thing. I'd like you to join me on this project. Your experience would be invaluable." The detective blinked, surprised. "Me? But Sarah, Think about it," she gently interrupted. "You don't have to answer now. But Jack, think about how many lives we could impact, how many families we could help." Brennan looked at Sarah, seeing in her not just the young woman who had disappeared 30 years ago, nor just the woman who had returned from exile. He saw someone who had faced the unimaginable and emerged stronger, more compassionate. Someone who had transformed her personal tragedy into a beacon of hope for others. "You know what?" he finally said, a smile spreading across his face. "I don't need to think about it. I'm in." Sarah's face lit up with a radiant smile. "Really? Oh, Jack, that's wonderful." As they toasted with their coffee cups, celebrating this new chapter in their lives, Brennan couldn't help but think about how unpredictable life was. The case that had consumed him for decades, that had been a source of so much frustration and despair, was now leading to something beautiful and meaningful. The autumn sun shone through the cafe windows, casting a golden glow over them. Outside, leaves were falling, marking the end of one season and the beginning of another. For Jack Brennan and Sarah Thompson, it was more than just a change of seasons, it was the beginning of a new journey, a chance to transform decades of pain and loss into something deeply meaningful and impactful. As they left the cafe, side by side, ready to face this new challenge together, both felt a profound sense of purpose and hope. The dormant case had finally been solved, but its legacy would continue to live on, touching countless lives in the years to come. And so, on an autumn afternoon in Chicago, two people who had been united by tragic circumstances walked towards the future, no longer as detective and victim, but as partners in a mission of hope and healing. The case that had defined their lives for so long now became the catalyst for something much greater than either of them could have imagined. I hope you enjoyed this story full of twists and emotions. If you liked it and want more exciting narratives like this, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the Stories Life channel. Here, every story is a new adventure, and we're always ready to surprise you. Also, leave your comments about what you thought of the story and suggestions for future narratives. See you next time.